Welcome to Leadership and Life Chat with your hosts, me, Becky Ames.
And me, Mark Curtis. In each episode, we'll be illustrating how success in leadership is inextricably linked with success in life.
Whether it's leadership in business, society, family or friends, we're all leaders.
Using our experiences and a range of expert guests, we'll share secrets to boosting your health, wealth and self.
So let's get on with the show.
What does transitioning mean to you? Today's guest, Dawn Bloomer, discusses with us what you should consider when you're going to sell your business, not just from a factual how you sell your business point of view. We steered clear of that, but what we looked at is emotionally, what does it mean for you as a business owner when you're going to sell your business? And the key question, what's next? We really enjoyed this conversation with Dawn. It was funny, it was informative, and we hope you enjoy this show as much as we did. So Dawn, welcome to the show.
Hi. Thanks so much for having me, Mark and Becky. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, well, we're
Great to
really
have
excited
you.
that you're joining us on the call today, Dawn. Fantastic topic we've got lined up for the listeners around business and retiring. However, before we get to that, would you like to just tell the listeners a little bit more about your backstory, just to put some context to this?
Sure. So for over 20 years, I was a veterinarian for racehorses. And so I spent my time actually at the thoroughbred racetracks primarily. And it was a really great gig for a long time. And what I found over time was that I didn't really know that much about running a business. And so I bought into our practice, which was a group practice, about 4 or 5 years into practice, and thought, well, I can figure this stuff out. But we were in a point in our practice that everything was going very well. And it's easy to run a business when the economy is great and you have lots of clients and you have lots of work, because even if you don't know what you're doing, you still make money. And so after a while, I realized I needed more knowledge. And so I did what every good professional does. I went and got another certification, right? So I went back to school and got my MBA. Now, when I say went back to school, I did that while, working 6 to 7 days a week. I had 2 little kids at the time, and I was, working full time and running the business. So that was pretty much a recipe for burnout. So along the way through my journey, I had all these sort of different challenges going along. Most of them pretty much all of them self-imposed, right? I was trying to figure out how to balance everything in my life and run a business well, and then figure out why I wasn't happy, even though outwardly I was very successful. So that's sort of all that in a nutshell. So fast forward a number of years ago, our business grew to a point where we didn't have an exit plan, and my partner and I were both interested in. We'd had 4 partners in the beginning, then we were down to 3, and then we were down to 2. And what we found over time was that a lot of young people were not that interested in buying in. A lot of veterinarians have huge student debt loads. I'm sure it's the same where you are as it is in North America. Huge challenge. And frankly, a lot of them just don't see the benefit of taking on more debt just to be a business owner. And I'm not sure they're wrong. So we eventually merged our practice with a group of 30-something other practices across North America. And we worked on growing that group for a while. And then it was eventually acquired by a much bigger aggregator. And at that point, I had spent a lot more time doing what I would now consider sort of business consulting and business management stuff than I was doing veterinary work. And so I thought that was a good time to pivot. And it was a big pivot. It was a much bigger pivot than I thought at the time. And I think the word pivot has come out a lot, I feel like, since COVID, because there are a lot of people that really reevaluated their lives during COVID. And so I think that it's a great topic of conversation, because it's something that a lot of people have done, some of them well, some of them still struggling. And then there are a lot more people still thinking about it.
So when you say you pivoted, Dawn, then where next? What happened next?
Well, that's a great question. So I said, so first of all, let me tell you that never in my even teenage life, was I without a job or an income, like an income derived from employment of some kind. And so the when I decided to leave my practice, I had no idea the impact of not having a paycheck coming in every couple of weeks. Because even as an owner, I had a paycheck, right? I mean, I had distributions and other things too, and benefits, and like, let's not start the list, because all of a sudden I had none of it. And the other thing that I had never done was started a business from scratch. When I joined our practice, it was a well-established group practice. There were a bunch of us. So all of a sudden I was on my own, and I had decided I wanted to be a business consultant. I had some I had some restrictions because of my non-compete after selling my business. So I was, I sort of jumped out of it, and um, I was really pretty lost for quite a while. Honestly, I knew what I wanted to do. I didn't know exactly how to do it, but those were logistical challenges, right? And that was the smallest part of the whole thing. The logistics, you can figure that out. You can get smart people to help you figure that out. What was really hard for me that I did not anticipate was the psychological impact, if you will. And that was the biggest hurdle at the end of the day, as it always is. You just never realize it until you're in it, right?
Yeah. And before the show, Dawn, we were talking, and very much the topic we were talking around is what we're going to cover a lot today, which is like the what next, isn't it? Business owners very often choose to sell, or they have big changes because of merging of a practice, as you went through. But very rarely do people perhaps think about, they're trying to move maybe away from something rather than towards something. So they're trying to maybe get away from the business they've created. They feel the time's right to exit it, sell it, whatever it might be. So they're trying to move away from that rather than thinking positively about, okay, what do I want to achieve next? What is next after this happens? And that's very much what you find and what you work with businesses on, isn't it?
Absolutely. And you stole one of my best lines, Mark. So thanks for that. That whole idea of, I mean, it really is you want to make sure that you're running towards something and not away from something. And that was the thing for me, was when I initially was thinking, for the long time that I thought about leaving my business, I was burned out a lot of that time. I was frustrated. I was tired. I had other things that I felt I was missing out on. And frankly, I was trying to run away. I did. I wanted to run away from my business. Like I used to say, I want to run away from work, like, and so that shift in my mindset didn't come until actually a really smart guy. I reached out to a coach, actually, who did a lot of work in with people in transition, and he was the one who said to me, "So are you running away? Like, what are you running to?" I'm like, "I have no idea. I just don't want to do this anymore." He's like, "Well, slow down." That was not something that was in my vernacular either. Slowing down. I was like, "No, I don't do slow. Like, this has to happen right away." And I still remember him like sitting there very patiently going, "Yeah, so, but where are you going?" I said, "I don't know, but he said, "Well, how are you going to get there?" I was like, "Yeah, I don't know. I just knew that I wanted to get out." And so I went through a whole process, which, still, even going through the process of thinking about all that, I still, once I made the leap, like actually doing, like making that decision, then there were so many little granular pieces of it, right? Because my identity was so tied up in that role. Like my entire life, I'd been trying to become a veterinarian. From the time I was 6, I knew I wanted to be a horse doctor, right? So I spent all of my energy and time truly, pursuing that goal and that passion. I didn't even think about it. I just kept doing, doing, doing. And then I got into the pattern of being in the business, and I did the same thing. I was doing, doing, doing. I never slowed down to think about it. I never even slowed down to think about whether it was the right path. Once I had decided, I was going to do it. And the fact that it was hard to do made it that much more fun, it was like, great. So then when I made this leap, when I actually left, and suddenly, I mean, technically I'm still a doctor, right? Like I have the degree, but I wasn't a practicing doctor anymore. So when people asked me what I did, I was like, I so I just didn't want to go anywhere. I literally didn't want to go out with friends. I didn't want to go out to dinner. I wasn't depressed. I just was sort of like lost. And because I felt like this big piece of me was suddenly erased. And it made it hard for me to enjoy the time that I had. I wish now going back that I could have just sort of sat with it a little bit longer and just been okay in that space. But I wasn't really wired that way. And I'm only now learning the true value of that. So I think one of the things that I would say to anyone who's considering this kind of a transition is that people are going to tell you stuff, and because in the moment it's really hard to hear and it's harder to do, try and find someone who can help, walk you through it, because it's really hard to hold yourself accountable to do difficult things. And this doesn't sound like a difficult thing, but it is.
Yeah.
you
It's
know
massive.
it
Massive.
is like I can't believe it. Like I never even people didn't even call me doctor, right? Like I worked at the racetrack, I worked around horses, people, walking around in horse manure. Like we didn't stand on a lot of ceremony, right? But then when I left, it was I didn't believe, like I wasn't a business owner anymore. Like I was a practice owner and I was a veterinarian and I was this and for decades, like sounds cool, right? And let me tell you, when you go out for dinner with someone or something and you say, "Oh, what do you do?" And they're like, "You're a veterinarian," or "God, you're a veterinarian for racehorses." They're like, "Whoa, what? That's really it sounds really interesting." You know, what you do well, I used to be. Well, it doesn't really hold the same, doesn't have the same gravitas.
No. And
So
I guess as well, it's often the case, isn't it? We're working towards something, an end goal that we're fixated on, and we're just frantically, sometimes trying to get there. And we know what we want to achieve, and we've got a plan. So whether it's an exit or whatever it is, and then when you get there and everything stops, and you're just like, oh, and it is that right. So what do I do now? And I completely understand what you mean about you wish you kind of just sat with it, because you then feel the pressure, I guess, to go, okay, so what's next? What is it? What do I need to prove next? Because
yes,
you've
what
lived like
do I
that for
need
so
to
long.
prove next?
Yeah.
I mean, it's like you got in my head right there. What do I need to prove next? And that became part of the problem. Was it was like I'd had this big business that was very lucrative and had employed a bunch of people. I mean, it was a going concern. It mattered. It seemed to matter in the world, right? Like we did stuff. It was important. And now what did I have? And listen, I was like, it wasn't that I needed to start making money immediately because I was financially unstable. That's the irony of it. Here I suddenly had all this time, which it was the time and the freedom that I wanted all along, right? But then I was like, what do I do with it? Now what? And that became, there were moments where that was almost sort of panic inducing, which seems so ironic because I was desperate to get it. And then I had it and I was like, I didn't know what to do with it. You know?
Yeah. So it's so interesting, isn't it? We certainly in the Western world, we spend the majority of us spend our lives being so busy, as you were saying. That when the merry-go-round does stop, we just don't know what to do because we've just not been trained that way for forever. It's like we're just not. And I suppose this, we've talked about this quite a lot on the podcast in the past, and my personal journey with like mindful meditation, and it's just such a difficult practice. I found as a Westerner to start with, because I was not used to sitting for 2 minutes, let alone 20 minutes or an hour, just
Yeah.
observing. It was just really uncomfortable to start with. And even now, it's funny, like today, I haven't practiced regularly for a few weeks now. And I said to Glenda, my wife, do you know what? I'm starting to feel a little bit frantic almost. I feel like I need to be doing. I can just feel like the doing thing is just kicking in too much.
Yes.
And I need
Yep.
to get my meditation practice going again, because you just you kind of you become almost like hyper alert all the while. It's hard to switch off. And then I notice affecting my sleep patterns and everything. It just filters all the way through life then. And just kind of giving yourself that space is difficult when you're not used to doing it.
It really is. And that was one of the hardest things for me because I've always been wired as a goer, you know. I mean, it's part of my identity. Part of my identity was that I'm the one. I'm like the Energizer bunny. I'm constantly on. I'm going, going, going all the time. And again, that wasn't a very it's not a very healthy, it wasn't a healthy identity to be attached to, frankly. It was sort of like that superwoman identity, you know, like a super mom, super this, super that. I had to be super everything. And that wasn't a great hat to wear either. I mean, it served me well in my career for sure. It didn't do a whole lot for my personal life, I'd say. But, that's another story. That's a really long one. But you know, but it's funny because it's hard for people to hang on to that, right? Like that's a ride that's hard to. It's hard to hang on for that ride because it's pretty intense. And so you know, one of the things about transitions that I learned actually from there's a guy named William Bridges and he's written lots of books about it. And I was introduced to him by this coach that I worked with. And one of the things that he says is that there has to be an ending before there's a new beginning. And I'm probably not quoting him exactly correctly, but it was interesting because I'd done a bunch of this work before I actually made the leap, if you will, to, leave. And yet until I actually did the thing, I have to tell you, I was not prepared for how it was really going to feel. And I thought, oh, I've done the work, I've done the work, I'm good. I was not good. And in the beginning I was sort of like super excited because I'm like, oh, I was sending pictures to my friends and family. I'm like, look at me, I am sitting on the couch by the pool and I'm reading a book with a blanket and a cup of tea. And they're like, who are you? And what have you done with Dawn? Right. And I'm like so proud of myself. I'm like bragging about it. And then I'm like, who have I become? I'm the person who's sitting on the couch with a cup of tea reading a book. Who is that? I do
Yeah.
not know her.
No. And that's like the hierarchy of how we perceive people ourselves, isn't it?
Yeah.
Or like, why is one better than the other? Why is running around like, working silly hours better than
Yes.
taking time for yourself, caring for yourself? But that's how we measure things. That's what we seem
It's
to value
true.
as a society, isn't it?
Do you know, I had a friend who texted me early in my transition, and she was in a different place in her life. She was really scrambling to, get by and all the things. And she texted me one day and she said very like passive aggressively, she said, "Oh, well, um, you're probably getting a mani-pedi or eating bonbons on the couch." And I was like, I was like gobsmacked. I was like on the one hand, I was like, how could she say that to me? That's so insulting. And then on the other hand, I'm like, well, what if I am?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, who are you to judge? Like, what if I am? What would be
Exactly.
wrong with that? If I have the time to do it, and I've got my. So you're right. I mean, the problem is, as a society, we tend to lift up the people who are workaholic, you know, you know, all out, all in, however you want to look at it, doing it all the time. And we look down on people who are trying to have some balance. And balance isn't always my favorite word because I think we talked about this on our pre-call. Like balance to me feels like a teeter-totter or a seesaw or the scales where there are two things and you've got to balance them out. But I think it's more about, harmony or flow or whatever woo-woo kind of thing you want to think. But I talk a lot about integration, like integrating your work and the rest of your life, and just remembering that there are so many pieces to your life. It's not just work and life, it's all the things together. But at any rate, I think I went off on a tangent there. But it is funny how people do judge you. And I certainly was judging myself. I didn't need any help,
People do though,
because
and we do it ourselves, don't we? Um, when I was on maternity leave, I was like, oh, I'm at home, or I used to hear my mum say it, I'm just a housewife. It's like, but
yes,
that's that's a really
yes.
valuable role.
It's a
It's not
very
even
valuable
terminology
role.
that we use now, I don't think, but back in the
No.
day.
Well, I have a friend who is convinced that she has no value because all she did was raise her 4 kids most of the time on her own. I'm like, wait, but you were like the CEO of your household, truly. Like that was a big job. It was really, I mean, she had a lot of moving parts in her life. And and I thought, isn't that a shame that that's the way that we feel about ourselves? And this isn't a woman only thing. I mean, I know guys who've stayed home and raised their kids and have the same struggles. And I think it's really sad because, you know, we kind of do it to ourselves, but there are definitely some pressures from the outside that it's easy to get caught up in.
Yeah, and it's, if you put a monetary value on your friend who brought up her 4 children, if you're going to pay someone to do that job, I mean, that would
I
be
did.
hundreds of thousands of dollars, wouldn't it, over a 16-year period? I mean, it would probably be millions of dollars. It would be a huge amount of money.
Yes.
But because it's, in inverted commas, voluntary and unpaid, it almost comes back to this thing about money is the only thing which is valued, isn't it? Where actually that non-remunerated input into economies around the world, it would be a massive, massive number, wouldn't it? In terms of, it's not measured in GDP, but it's a huge number.
It is a huge number. And I think it's interesting because I did pay people to help raise my kids. I had two because I worked 6 to 7 days a week and I was on call. So I had a nanny during the week and I had a nanny on the weekends. And in the beginning, you want to talk about maternity leave, Becky. I felt so guilty about leaving now, granted, this is not something that was imposed on me. Like, I want to be clear. I made these choices, and I think it's an important thing to differentiate. I assumed that if I didn't come back very quickly after I had my first child, that I wouldn't make partner. I probably assumed correctly, but I didn't ask. I didn't ask. I assumed and I made a choice. And so I scheduled to come back 3 weeks to the day after I had my first child. I
Wow.
brought him to work with me. I had a nanny who rode around in my truck with me. I had a client who gave me one of the rooms in his barn, like one of his little tack rooms, offices, and let me put some stuff in there for the nanny and the baby so that I could go pump and do all the things. The second time around, I actually scheduled to be induced because I knew that my doctor was going out of town and my person who was covering for me for my 3-week maternity vacation, which it came to be called, was going to be going out of town as well. So I had this window. So I scheduled to be induced. And then, I came back 3 weeks later. This time, though, I got smart. I bought an RV and I parked it at the racetrack so the nanny could have the kids in the RV with her own bathroom and kitchen and stuff. So, like at the time, like it sounds ridiculous when I tell people about it now, but at the time, it just seemed like it was a logistics problem, and so I solved the logistics problem, right?
I bet you thought you were smashing it. Like,
I thought it
look
was
what I've
brilliant.
done. Look
I
what
was
I've
like,
achieved. And
look
you
at
were.
me.
There's no
Yeah,
denying
yeah.
it.
I was like, look at me. No big deal. Like all these women who don't stay at the racetrack after they have babies, like what's wrong with them? Don't think I wasn't judging them a little bit. I was
Yeah.
like, what do you mean you can't do this with kids? What do you mean? Because there at that point there wasn't anyone on our circuit who had stayed. There were female veterinarians. We were starting to have more female veterinarians because in the beginning it was mostly men. We were starting to have more female veterinarians and more of them that were having kids, but they would have the kid. They might stay for a heartbeat, but then they'd leave because it was just, I mean, it was a terrible lifestyle. I mean, they were the smart ones. I wasn't the smart one, but I thought I was. I was like, oh, look at me go, So, I only say that because, like, I don't even think we realize we're so busy doing, we don't realize all these things that are wrapped up in it and all the things all these patterns of behavior we've developed that when the container that they're within is gone, all of a sudden you're like, oh, why did I do that? Why did I do it that way? Like when I look back on all of the decisions I made, and let's be clear, I made those decisions. Like those things didn't happen to me. I made those choices. Those were choices that I made. Even when I got burnt out, I chose to work like a maniac. I like I can blame it on I could try to blame it on, my partners who weren't really, didn't really value time off the way that I did, weren't as concerned about, their kids were, well, one of them, the kids were a little older, another one, just wasn't his priority. He really loved being at work all the time. I could blame it on them all I want, but at the end of the day, I chose to do what I did. I could have left. I could have left at any point.
Yeah. Mark, we've talked about this between the two of us, haven't we? In terms of, sometimes you feel that you do need to make, and you could, call it what you like, sacrifice. You make your choices, don't you? And yeah, I think sometimes you can look back and go, maybe.
And Becky, you're right. We've talked about this, and Dawn, we kind of touched on this on the pre-recording chat as well. And sacrifice is quite an extreme word, probably, but I think we're all having the same discussion, which you mentioned a little while ago, Dawn, which is what is balance. It's very difficult if you're a business owner. It's very, very difficult to not have to make some sacrifices around family time in most instances, isn't it? You're building a business. No one's going to build it for you. You might have a team around you, but you have to make some sacrifices along the way, or you don't have to make sacrifices. And and I think this is the thing, isn't it? It's not about judging anybody on what they do. If somebody chooses to sacrifice their business/career to spend more time with family because that is more important to them, then we celebrate that as much as we do somebody who wants to kind of sacrifice family time to develop the business. It feels like to get that balance, you're going to end up with so much compromise. You probably are going to struggle to kind of do either very well. You're just going to end up in this halfway house where maybe it doesn't work out. I mean, we've talked about it. Certainly, when I got offered the partnership at Larkin Gowan back in 2006. Glenda, my wife, I said, like, this, if I take the partnership, this is what it's going to mean. And Glenda had worked in professional practice. She knew what the score was going to be. It was going to mean a lot of hours, trawling around the networking scene, building a portfolio of clients. It doesn't happen without a sacrifice of personal time to do that. So, as a couple, we made the decision that, we were going to do that because that was what we chose to do to try and hopefully build some financial security for our family. So we made a choice, but it was a sacrifice. The other sacrifice would have been I didn't take the partnership and would have carried on merrily as a manager without investing the time that I have over the last 17 years. So all of us have
Yep.
made sacrifice. Now, would we do it differently if we had our time again? That's a completely different question. But at the time, I suspect we all went in with our eyes open, and we made decisions which led to certain sacrifices.
Yep, that's exactly right. And I would say that when I bought into my practice, I didn't even think twice. That's what I had been waiting for. I'd been waiting for that opportunity. I was so excited. I really didn't do any due diligence. I just sort of said, yay. And, and it's easy for me to say now that I made choices and decisions. It wasn't until much later in my career that I actually thought about the decisions I was making and the choices that I was making. I went through a time when I was just like, well, it's not my fault. I can't get time off, nobody else values it, da, da, da. I'm much more evolved now than I was earlier in my career. I hadn't done, you talked, Mark, about, mindfulness, and I didn't know what mindfulness was back then. I was just, hanging on and just doing what I knew, which was work harder, do more things, make more money. And I always tell myself, I don't know if anyone else has had this experience in the room, but I would always tell myself, if I can just get through it. In the beginning, it was like, if I can just get through the next 6 months, it's going to get better. I don't know how many times I told myself that. Then it would be like, if I can just get through the next 6 weeks, then I'll do something about it, or then it'll be okay. And then I got to a point where I was like, when I really started to get fried, I was like, I don't know how I'm going to get through the next, 6 days. How am I going to get through the next 6 days? Or okay, I'd bargain with myself in the morning because I didn't want to get out of bed at 3:30 or whatever. I'd be like, okay, if I just get up now, maybe I can take a nap later. And knowing full well I was never taking a nap. I am not a napper. It wasn't. But I could start this whole bargaining thing. So it's funny how it's easy for me to say now that I know that I made choices in all of those moments, but it wasn't until much later that I started to realize that those things weren't happening to me. I owned them. I was making the choices. So, because I don't want to sound like I was really that evolved the whole way along. I was not. Like, I
No.
was just in the moment doing the thing. I had no idea what I
Yeah,
was doing. I was just
no,
making it up as I
and
went along.
I think
I didn't slow down to think.
no, and I suspect the majority of us, certainly in professional careers, are no different because as a junior partner, you've worked your way through the business, you've been invited into the partnership, and the whole journey, you're at the bottom of the ladder again. It's kind of like snakes and ladders. You've kind of you've
Yes,
gone from a big fish in a small pond to suddenly
Drift.
and then you're at the start of your partnership career, and you look up and there's all these senior partners, there's people 20, 30 years older than you who you think I could never be like that, but that's where I want to aspire to get to. And then the whole journey starts again, doesn't
yes,
it? The clock resets and off
yes,
you
it
go again.
does.
So
And you
you,
go in thinking, oh,
yeah,
now I have a say, right? Oh, I can make a difference. I have some great ideas. I'm sure they're going to listen to me. And then I'd come in like a bull in a china shop and be like, oh, I have this great idea. And they'd be like, yeah, we tried that before. It doesn't work. Or I'd be like, oh, well, what about this? And they'd be like, no. And I was like, okay, this isn't nearly as much fun as I thought it was going to be. Not that they never agreed, but you know what I mean? But you're right. To your point, it's true because even if you're a partner, like I was an equal partner as far as shares went, but I didn't have nearly as much experience and I hadn't been there for all the things that had transpired. I didn't have as much institutional knowledge for sure.
mm,
I didn't have, and that's one of the reasons I went back and got my MBA is because I felt like I needed to do something to create some added level of sort of credibility in their eyes, like, hey, look, I learned all this stuff, I want to share it with you.
Yeah.
Which
Bring something
then
else
you
to
get
the
into this whole
table.
thing of, yeah, how do you share that information with
Yeah.
people who really don't want to hear it? I mean, it's amazing the things I learned through the process by doing it wrong or the hard way mostly, but
Yeah, but that's life, isn't it? But I can see what you mean. You wanted to find something that gave you an edge, that set you apart, that you could bring to the table, that was like, look, I've got this. Um, and I completely understand that. So today, Dawn, the work that you do as a consultant is about helping people understand what that's going to look like.
yeah, so I spend a lot of time having conversations about things like, well, like, what do you really want? Like, what do you really want? What do you really want? Because here's the other challenge I find is that a lot of professionals who own their own business or are a partner in their business, it's hard for them to think about what they want because they spend all their time thinking about what's best for their business, right? Because as we know, owning a business, and there's something that's a little bit different too, I feel like, or a little bit special when it comes to professionals because we are so highly trained in a thing, and and for most of us, there's a level of there's less room for error in most of the things that we do. There's often a regulatory piece, like there are a lot of things wrapped up in it, and so I feel like there's something about that professional thing that makes it hard for us to put ourselves first because really, I mean, we've got to make sure that our client is getting the like the perfect outcome, right? We're always striving for perfection even though we know it's not attainable, but I feel like we tend to be wired more for perfection. And I bring that up because I think it's a huge problem when it comes to thinking about what you want for yourself, because you're still so wrapped up in, well, all this stuff has to happen for the business and da 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 da. So actually pulling yourself out for a moment and thinking about what you really want is the first step. And it's often the hardest thing to get people to do.
Mm.
So, because the reason why a lot of people end up being devastated. And I say devastated because I'm not overstating it. There are some statistics around how many business owners that sell their business, this is business owners in general, who sell their business who a year later, who are really, they wish they hadn't, they wish they could have it back. And I really believe that most of that is tied up in the fact that they haven't prepared for what they're going to do with themselves
Mm.
after they sell the business. So
Mm.
for a lot of the people that I work with, our starting point is actually not even about necessarily getting out of the business, although there are lots of people who come because they're already at that stage where they're like, I just have to get out. They want to run away, right? I like to help people before they get to the runaway stage, because once you
Yeah.
get to the runaway stage, often you're so burned out, but it's where they're still caught up in the day to day so much that they're making a lot of money generally, and they have no time to spend it. They have no time, no freedom, no, even if they can find some time, they either don't have the energy or they don't have the mental bandwidth to really enjoy it. Like
Mm.
sometimes like I remember when I would get a week off or something, which was like a woo. The problem would be I'd spend 2 weeks before prepping, right? Like preparing for my exit, like preparing the world for me to be gone for a week, like it was going to fall down or something. And then I would spend the first 3 days of vacation trying to wind down and waiting for the other shoe to drop, like it really was the world was gonna explode now that I'd left. Never did. Funny thing. And then I'd have like 2 days in there where I was like, wow, vacation. It's amazing. I love it so much. This is the best. I wish I could do this all the time. And then I'd be a couple days from getting back, then I'd be like worrying again, right? I'd be worrying, I'd be all up in my so I the reason I bring this up is that I'm not special. I'm not the only one who feels this. There are a lot of people out there who are like on the outside they look super successful. Like all my friends were like, "Oh, you've really got it figured out." Pulling yourself out of the center of the business so that the business can sustain itself whether you're there or not. And it's important for lots and lots of reasons. It's not just because at the end of the day you're going to want to leave or you're going to leave because, you know, stuff happens, right? And so it's really important to remove yourself from the center of your business so that you can have a life, like you can do things, you
Mm.
can live. And the bonus is that when you get to a point where you either want to sell out to someone within your organization or you want to get out entirely, your business is actually something you might be able to sell. You can't sell it if you're the
Mm.
thing. If you are the
Yeah.
business, it has no value. I don't care how much it makes. If you are the business, no one's going to buy it, at least
It's
not for anything more than what the parts are worth.
No, agreed. It's really interesting. We've within our business, we've got a corporate finance team who buy and sell businesses for clients,
Mhm.
and that they would agree 100% with everything you've just said there. As you were talking, one of the things which came into my head, we very often talk to our clients about preparing your business for sale. But the one thing we never actually talk about, which is what you're here talking about today, Dawn, is preparing yourself for the business sale. So we never talk about the individual. It's always about the business, preparing the business for sale, window dressing, getting the 3-year runoffs, trying to get the business ready for sale. But
Yeah,
we never actually, because we are accountants and corporate financiers, we don't think about the impact on the individual as such. Only
right.
their inheritance tax position over here in the UK,
Yeah.
but not
Well,
actually their position.
Yeah.
yes. Well, and Mark, it's a great point because that's one of the reasons why I partner with people like you, like accountants and financial planners, because that's the other piece that so many professionals often have handed off to somebody and not really paid any attention to is um, your financial plan.
Mm.
So the things that I really talk about that I start with right out of the box are, where do you want to go? Where do you personally want to go? Where are you now personally, financially, and where's your business at right now? Where is everything? Like, let's get the lay of the land. And then it's a matter of putting the right people in place to help you really get clear and granular on what is your reality. People don't want to do it. It's the most painful part because they think, oh God, now I'm going to know. But I got to be honest with you, one of the most powerful things I ever did is have my personal financial plan done when I was getting divorced the second time.
Mm.
Another story. But but there are a lot. We could go on and on. We will. But the financial plan for me made me realize that I had choices. It turned out at that moment in time when I had
Yeah.
that done, the choices were not great, but there were choices. I could have made different choices. And that's when it started to become clear to me. Because money, as much as we don't like to talk about it, because there are all sorts of things hung up in that, money matters because you've got to pay the bills. So that financial plan, so that's why I love to work with people who have, if they don't have them, they're going to have one. Like I had a client who had no personal financial planner, no accountant, didn't have a good lawyer. Like one of the first things we do is get you the right professionals in place so that you can get this information. Because the other thing that happens a lot, even that happened to me, is in my personal financial plan, my business at the time was on my balance sheet as part of my net worth statement, right? As part of my net worth, my business was in there, the value of my business. And I kept asking the guy, I'm like, well, how do you know? And he was in our industry. And so he's like, oh, well, based on a discounted cash flow model, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, yeah, but like if my partner or I leave, like there is no business. He's like, no, 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 it'll be fine. By the time we get there, it'll be fine. Did nothing. So all of my financial plan decisions were being made around that being the biggest bucket, by far the biggest bucket. So all of this, diversifying of investments and all this stuff was being done based on that chunk being a big piece of the picture. And, like I'm not a financial planner, but I now know that that wasn't very smart because really at that time, the business had no value other than as long as I was working in it and the stuff we had. So it was probably worth a couple $100,000 at the time.
Yeah. It's
So
such an important piece to do, isn't it? And in fact, sometimes the financial planning piece can be quite a surprise to clients. I've seen it where they realize they think they need to achieve a certain amount for their business to be able to exit, to retire, whatever it is they want to do. And when you forecast it and you take into account, that your income requirements by the time you reach that age probably aren't as great as they are now. Do you know what? You don't need to get that much for your business. So it could change the whole landscape, or it could shift the other way and go, actually, well, you need this much. So let's really drive the business to get to that point. But it's so important to model it, isn't it? And to see where it's going and what you need to get to. Because like you say, otherwise you get there and you're just sort of like, well, what now?
yeah. And that's why for me that's like the most important piece early on is really getting an understanding, because you're right, sometimes it's so much better than you thought. You had no
Yeah.
idea. And
Yeah.
the models that they have now to work all that stuff out are like super cool, and anybody can understand them, because I think part of the problem is we worry that we'll get in there and we won't know what they're talking about and they'll just kind of bamboozle us. But the models now are they're so friendly.
Yeah,
like
no, I agree. And I
graphic
think building that,
descriptions and stuff.
yeah, and you can tweak it, can't you? But building that team around the
Yeah.
client is something that we
Yes.
absolutely advocate all the time, because then you've got all the different elements, haven't you? And there's nothing like having experts that are actually doing this stuff day in day out to help you get to where you want to get to. But Mark's completely right. We often are like, what's the goal for the business? What do you want to achieve for the business?
Yeah.
And whilst most of our people that Mark and I work with are owner managers, so effectively they are the business,
Yeah.
or they think they are.
Yeah.
It's a whole other conversation about what do you personally want, what do you want to achieve, and I think that's such an important question to ask our clients and ourselves. Really important.
Yeah. I think that, and I think that's it. I think for you guys as accountants, I think it's a great value add because it's something that is not happening in most places. And no offense, but I think accountants often aren't thought of as the people who, look at the holistic piece of it. It's about the money and the numbers, and which I love you for, don't get me wrong. But I think
That's right.
that you're all right with it. But I think I think it's something where the more conversations we're having about it, the better off we are, because we're never going to have enough conversations about it.
No. And I think just picking up on your point about most accountants, I completely get that perception. And I think Mark and I are both the sort that are far more interested in the people. and the why for them as
Yeah.
well. So, for us, it is all about the
Yes.
people. But I completely get why the perception of accountants is we're just looking at the numbers. But it's so
Yes.
much
Yes.
more
No.
fun than that. So much more
It is
exciting.
so much more fun. Yeah, it is so much more fun. And to your point about the why, that's another really important exercise. Like I remember when I was introduced to, Simon Sinek's whole concept of, what is your why? If anybody hasn't looked at that, go to YouTube, Simon Sinek, why? Uh, That is such a simple exercise and so valuable because really and it's important for everybody. It's not just business owners. It's one of the things I talk to about people when they're working with their team members is that when you look at motivation in general, right? Um, Dan Pink has done some great work on, what motivates people, and he talks about autonomy, mastery, and purpose, right? That purpose one is often the hardest one to figure out. Autonomy, that's pretty easy, tell them what you want them to do, and or tell them what you want to accomplish and let them figure out how to do it. Mastery, well, make sure you give them all the tools but the why part,
Yeah.
that's often the hardest, and I think that's why it's one of the first things that I start with on business owners as well, is that, well, so why? Like, why do you have this business? Like, what is the point of this business? Because some people, it's their lifestyle business, right? Like they just want to make enough money that as long as they're working, they've got income and da da da. That's cool. If that's what you want, then that's great. Then you have to have certain things in place to mitigate your risk because something could happen to you. If you don't have any depth, then that can be a problem. But most business owners, I would argue, really they have a lifestyle business, but what they really want is a business that will be sustainable over time, and they can pass it along for money, hopefully, or to family. And so sometimes they just aren't running it in a way that supports what they want their outcome to be, and why they want that to happen. So the
Mm.
why is really important.
So important. I think
Yeah.
purpose is the real key word for me there, Mark.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And coming back to your point, Dawn, about, if you can't walk away from your business and it runs itself, you haven't actually got a business. And I remember there was Brad Sugars, the Australian coach, action coach, I think is his business. I went on his $1 billion coach tour, or whatever it was called, years ago. And he said the same thing. If you can't walk in one morning and say, right, I'm off for 6 months. If you can't do that and come back to a functioning business, you haven't got a business. Your business is running you. You're not running your business. And that really stuck with me. And I remember a conversation with a client many years ago now, where they were saying to me, do you know what, I think I've had enough. I think I want out of my business now. And I said, well, rather than kind of throwing all your chips on the table, why don't you go in and say to your business partner, I want 6 months out of the business. And the color drained from their face, because it wasn't actually what they really wanted. And just that one question, or that one challenge to them, was enough to actually, like, really crystallize their thoughts, which is they wanted to change the dynamic within the business, but they didn't actually want to walk away from the
Really.
business. And that one question was enough to just shake it down for them, to really get to the core of what they wanted. So it is, as you say, it's kind of, people say things, but it
Yeah.
does take a little bit of prodding and poking and questioning at times to really, I guess it's almost like the petulant child thing, isn't it? I've crossed your arm, stamped your feet. I've had enough of my business. I don't want it anymore. And it's like, well, actually, you do. You just want it. You want the dynamic to change somehow. Can we change it in a different way? You don't have to necessarily sell it. Maybe you can bring a manager in. You can kind of like take time out, whatever it is. But it's just trying to get to what they really want, isn't it?
It is. And actually that's a great point. That's what happens often is people will come and they'll say, "Yeah, I want to get out. I've had enough." Da, da. And then when they realize that they can actually have their cake and eat it too,
Mm.
they're like, "Oh, well,
Mm.
it's just they don't even believe that there's another way
Well,
because
they're
they're
too
sure
in
they've
it.
tried all
Yeah.
the things, you know? Yeah.
Yeah. They're too in the business, as you say, aren't they? And they can't
Yes.
remove themselves from it long enough to actually look up and out a little bit and see how it could be. But
Exactly. I have a friend who says it's hard to read the label when you're inside the jar. And
oh,
isn't that good? I know, right? She's a
Yeah.
marketer. She's a marketer. She's good.
I love
But
that.
I love that visual, right? Like it's hard to read the label when you're inside the jar. Yeah.
That's good.
I know
I'm
that's
going
a
to
good
use
one,
that.
right? See, we're coming up with all these great sayings.
Yeah.
But
But
it's a great visual, right? Because it really is. It's
Mm,
not your fault. It's not your fault because the reality is when you're in the thick of it, it's interesting too, because I often work with people who are in various industries, right? That are not veterinarians. And so I've had people ask me before, they're like, well, how do you help people who aren't in your industry? I'm like, well, I mean, lots of professionals help people that aren't in the industry they came from. I could have just
mm,
come from business school, right? But what actually gives me an edge, I think, is that I don't necessarily know the way you run your business.
yeah.
And so I can ask some really dumb, great questions.
mm,
Because sometimes just asking a question makes someone go like, I don't know, why don't we do that?
yeah.
Huh.
Mm,
And sometimes there are things that you can steal from other industries, the way they do things that you would never have thought of trying, and you just haven't done because it's not what people do in our industry. I
yeah.
think one of those things that's going to be very interesting to see, I'm not sure how you guys do it, but I think what's going to be very interesting to see in the professional services industries in general is the idea around not trading time for money anymore. The billable hour, I think there are so many things that are changing exponentially fast now that are going to make the billable hour just a really dumb idea. That a lot more people are going to be moving away from it and looking at how they can productize their services or create subscription services,
Mm,
because there are going to be ways that people can do things faster, and it's not going to feel good to bill for more time than it takes. And at some point I feel like what people can wrap their head around, paying someone per hour, maxes out, right? Like at some point they're like, I can't pay you $10,000 an hour to do
Mm,
that. But yet if I can do it that fast, isn't it still worth it?
mm.
So anyway, that's kind of an
yeah.
aside, but it just made me think it's interesting how things are changing. And
It's a slight aside. But what it could do, I suspect, what it could do is it could drive people out of their businesses because they don't know or they can't work out how to adapt and change to that changing world around them. So coming back to sort of this whole "what next" type thing, people might be getting
yes,
out for the wrong reasons again. And again, it's just having those right conversations with the right people, isn't it? It's a bit like people, coming to
yes,
you, Dawn, to really talk through what next. And then if the root cause of it is they don't think they can cope with the change from billable hours, well, that's a different problem to just throwing in the towel and walking away from the problem, because they could be walking into an even bigger problem if they haven't sorted their life out before they do it. So, all of this stuff seems to come back to the same kind of core point, doesn't it? Which is really understanding the
yes.
why, as you and Becky said earlier. It's the why you're doing this stuff. Why are you doing the business? Why do you not want to do the business anymore? Because the why you don't want to do it could be there might be all this other stuff that you want to do, and you've not had the time to do it. You've now got the finances to do it. You want to get the time back, so how do you structure it that way? But
Yeah,
at least you do it with your eyes
yeah,
open at that point, and you've had the conversation with yourself, your financial planner. You've worked it all through as a proper plan. You haven't just kind of knee jerked into I want to run away from this.
exactly. I think you nailed it. And that's the thing. It really is about having conversations and slowing down a little bit. Like I say this as someone who couldn't, but slowing down, or at least having someone make you slow down long enough to make sure that you're going in the right direction. Because the
Mm,
thing is, we
Mm,
know that any strategy or any plan that we make doesn't work without action, right? Yeah, it also needs to be the right action.
mm,
Part of the problem is that we get so busy doing and taking action that we haven't slowed down to see if we're taking action in the right direction.
yeah,
mm.
you need to pause to review,
You
don't
really
you?
do. And it's hard. It's hard, especially in the moment. And it's one of those things where often we need someone to, and it's easy for me to say, like, it doesn't have to be me, but you often need someone to hold you accountable,
Yeah, it is to
someone to
like pull
help
you out,
you.
isn't it?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
I completely agree.
Absolutely.
I think that's when a coach or a mentor is so useful.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes.
We always talk about accountability partners, don't we? Whoever it is, just have an accountability partner, someone who you trust, so they can call you out on it.
Absolutely. And preferably someone who, isn't too wishy-washy and isn't afraid to sort of like kick you in the butt when you need it too.
Yeah,
Because sometimes we need that.
yeah,
Sometimes we just need to say, like, stop wallowing, move on, just do it.
Yeah,
Other times you
definitely.
need someone who says, okay, well, yeah, that sucked.
yeah.
Okay, now go do it.
Definitely. Yeah. I mean, Becky and I have always had business coaches. My business coach at the moment is an Australian guy, and he just doesn't pull any punches. It's fantastic. He's because we have that trusting relationship. He's very direct, which is great, and I don't get offended by it because I know he's doing it with my best interests at heart. So that's fine.
Yeah, that's sort of my approach too. I mean, it's sort of like somebody once called me a truth teller with love. Like, I'm going to tell you how it is. I mean, you're going to know that I'm holding your hand while I'm doing it, but it's just not efficient for me to just give you
Mm.
the rose-colored glasses of you, or just to try and make you feel better. Telling you what you want to hear so that you feel better is not going to get you where you need to go.
No, no.
And you're
It's
right,
really true.
Mark, it takes a little bit of time to get that trust, but once you do, once you have someone who can do that for you, I mean, I have people who do that for me. I have a coach, I have all the things. I have several accountability partners, and it makes all the difference. I don't get to slip very long.
Well, really conscious of the time that you've given us today, and very appreciative of it. Thank you. We're now going to move towards our final two closing questions, if it's okay with you. And we
Okay,
did
good.
give you
I'm ready.
we gave you some warning on these, so hopefully that helped. So the first one is, if you were going to recommend three books or podcasts around this kind of topic, what would they be?
So the first book I already mentioned, and I'm going to give you three that probably most people have not heard of in the coaching space. If you were in the coaching, like in the business coaching space, you might have heard of them, but I just think they're so good. There are three that keep coming off my shelf that I send to people all the time. So the first one is that book Transitions that I told you about. It's William Bridges and Susan Bridges, and it's just a really great book talking about all the things that go into transitions. So I highly recommend that one. I mentioned a bit about it earlier. The second one is called The Big Leap. It's by Gay Hendricks. You can see I've got sticky notes in it. It's like one of my favorites. He talks a lot about your zone of genius. But one of the things that he talks that one of the frameworks he has in here is around worrying. It's called Conquer Your Hidden Fear and Take Life to the Next Level. I really got a lot out of the idea of he talks about your upper limit problem, which is why you can't get past a certain level because you get in your own way, about self-limiting beliefs and all of that
Yeah.
stuff, and about worrying. Like, I used to be like an insane worrier. Like, I worried about everything. Like, people say, like, why are you worrying about that? Like, you can't do anything about it. His frameworks really, really helped me with the worrying too. So zone of genius, worrying, and upper limit problem, all in that book. Great book. Love it. And then this one actually might be the one to start with, because I feel like it gives you a framework for how you approach life, and it's really perfect for anyone thinking about any kind of transition. So it's called Reinventing Yourself, and it's by a really well-known coach, Steve Chandler. And it's called How to Become the Person You've Always Wanted to Be. One of the things I love about Steve Chandler is that he's funny. He's funny. He tells funny stories. So I'd actually encourage getting the audiobook, because he's great to listen to. But he talks about, mainly, the whole idea is about learning to own your decisions, learning to be an owner of your outcomes instead of being a victim. Now, I'm obviously paraphrasing, there's a lot more to it.
Yeah.
That's the main concept of that. And that's the most valuable thing that I really started to embrace. Like, I've always taken responsibility for myself, I've always, owned it. But I took it to a new level after reading that book. And he just has some really great frameworks in there. So those would be my top three for this topic.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you.
Brilliant.
I've not actually read any of those three, so that's three more
Right?
books I can add to my
Yay!
pile. So that's fantastic. I mean, the big leap. The big leap. Really, like the thing about the fear. I'm with you. I think Becky and I have discussed this in the
Yeah.
past. I think we were both massive worriers. And if a book like this, if I was 20 or 25 again, I'd love to read that
Mm.
book. I'm going to read it anyway,
Yes.
but it would just save me so much kind of, so much worry and anxiety and sleepless nights.
Yes, and it teaches you all about the zone of genius and, why you should stay in your zone of genius, why, what it is, how you figure out what yours is, and then how you stay there. And that filters
Mm,
down into how you work with your team and all sorts like it's a great book. It's a great book. Lots of
yeah.
great concepts in there. So yeah,
Wow.
I'm glad you haven't heard of them. I mean, that was kind of my goal. I was like, I gotta because there are lots of, like you do Simon Sinek's The Why and like there are lots that people have heard of, but those are really
Yeah.
good. Really love them. So thanks
Brilliant.
for asking.
Brilliant. And then, Dawn, our final question. If you could go back in time and give your 18-year-old self one piece of advice, doesn't need to be 18, but your younger self, what would it
Yeah.
be?
Well, it's funny because I was talking a little bit about this with my family, and I was like, "Oh my God!" I mean, the first thing would be that would I listen? Probably not. But assuming I would listen, it's a lot. Probably I would not. It's funny. My dad said the other day. He said, "Well, whenever you decide to do something, I know you're going to do it." He said, "I just get out of the way." But I would say that really, it's all the same things that I tell myself now. It's things like don't make it so hard. Like I always had a tendency to pick the
Mm,
harder path. Like
Mm,
if there was a way that I could possibly make it harder, I would. Um, so don't make it so hard. It doesn't have to be hard for you to have accomplished something. I mean, I feel like I've gone through my whole life saying I do hard things.
yeah.
I do hard things and I conquer them. Well, yeah, half the time because you make them hard. So I guess that would be number one is don't make it so hard. Like life doesn't have to be hard for you to be accomplished and for you to
Yeah.
be, successful. And then number two would be let people help you. It wasn't until much later in my life that I learned the value, that whole saying about, it takes a village to raise a
Mm,
child or whatever.
mm,
I had so many opportunities along the way where I could have let people help me. And I always saw it as a sign of weakness, or I've always had this feeling that I was imposing. Um, and so people like to help. I like to help other people. I don't know why I thought I was the only person on the face of the planet who liked to help. Other people like to help too, let them, you know? Like,
yeah.
huh. But it was such a revelation for me, and it's been a game changer. And then, the third one would be corny but true, like enjoy the process. We've talked a lot
mm,
today about how it's, we feel like it's all about the goal because to be a professional, you have to be goal oriented. Let's face it. You have to want the goal badly enough to go through all the things to get there because the reality is some of it is hard, but enjoy the process. That's the one thing that I'm really working on daily now. Mark, to your point about mindfulness and um, I'm really working hard on enjoying the process because the thing is it's all about the journey, and it sounds crazy, like as I've gotten older I've realized all those things that all the old people used to say to me, they've been around forever because it's true. Like
Because
they're
it's
all
true.
true.
Yep.
mm.
Right, Becky? I
Yeah,
mean,
Yep.
like how many times have we heard, all these sayings and we're like, yeah, whatever, roll your eyes. But they're true. That's why they're still around. So that's why we're going back to stoicism and now and hearing all of
mm,
the, you see all the quotes from stoicism out there. So enjoy the process. That would be my other one.
yeah.
Again, all the things
I'm
I'm telling
just
myself now on the daily.
I'm just so with you on that one. I mean, my biggest mantra to myself and people around me is probably it's the journey, not the destination. And it was
Yes.
mindfulness that did that for me as well. So even if I'm doing the dishes in the evening, it used to the classic one was probably watering the garden. I used to I'd be like, oh God, this is taking forever to water the raised beds and the flowers. And it used to be so everything a lot of things used to be a chore. Once you suddenly get into the mindset of it's the journey, not the destination, you can actually enjoy watering the garden. It's not just about getting the pots
Yes.
watered, it's actually the process of doing it. And everything becomes much more enjoyable. And then it's less frustrating. You don't get quite as annoyed or irritable about it. It just, yes,
Yep.
good stuff starts to happen then, doesn't it?
It's true. I just had that happen yesterday, and I had to do something that I was like, "Oh my gosh, are you kidding me? How did this get to be like this?" I actually stepped it's a long story, but I stepped in some dog poop and then marched around in my running shoes throughout the one whole section of my house, carpet, all the things, and had to clean it up. And at first I was like, "Oh my God, are you kidding me? This is such a hot mess." And then I was just like, "Well, when's the last time I got to wash the carpet?" You know?
Wow.
When's the
Brilliant.
last time I really got to get down on my hands and knees and scrub the floor? And at first I was just making myself say that, right? But then I kind of got into it. I'm like, wow, the floor's really clean. It smells really good. It's really clean.
That really is turning it around. I'm
But
not
you're
sure most
so
people
right.
would achieve that.
Oh, believe me, it was like in the moment I was like, "Oh my God." Like it was so ridiculous. I mean, it was everywhere. I had these Hoka running shoes on with the big, treads in them, and I'd stepped in it, I didn't notice, and I was like walking around talking blah 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 as I want to do, walking around the whole first little part of the house. Oh my gosh. But yeah, it is mind over matter, right?
Mm, yeah. Well,
So
and what a great point to
Wow.
finish on,
on that
because
note.
if you can find the journey part of that story, then anyone listening to this, everything else is pretty minor compared to that.
Yeah, right? I know.
Yeah.
Well, I liked your water in the garden. I probably should have just left it at that, but, leave the veterinarian to bring poop into the story. Yeah.
I was going to say, we've never had a poo story, so we'll leave it in.
Yeah. I like it. It's good.
You're
Anyway,
welcome. I'm glad you're
on
making me brown.
on that note, I think we'll
I might need to add
probably
a trigger warning.
yeah.
Trigger warning, yeah. Well, that won't be the first time someone's had to do that with me, so there you go.
Well, I think the podcast has kind of descended into some sort of chaos now, so we've probably reached a
I
good point
know.
to end. But Dawn, honestly, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you as a guest on this show. It's been good fun, but there's been so much value for the listeners as well. If they want to reach out to you to find out more of what you do and how you can help them, where's the best place for them to reach you?
The easiest place to find me is on my website, which is productivepressure.com, all one word. I'm also
Brilliant.
on LinkedIn, Dawn Bloomer, but the website's the easiest place.
We'll make sure that the links for LinkedIn and for your website are in the show notes. So if people want to reach out, they can just click through and get straight through to you, Dawn. So that just leaves us to say thank you. You've been so generous with your time, some great stories as well. We've really enjoyed ourselves today. So thank you very much for being a guest on the show.
It's been great. Thank you both so much for having me, Becky. Mark, been a
Thank
pleasure.
you.
Well, Becky, that was a fun conversation with Dawn, but very informative as well. And in traditional fashion, we're now going to have to try and pick out 3 points that really resonated with us. There was lots, let's be honest, and
There
I'm sure
was.
most of the listeners would be kind of nodding along to that one. But if we're going to try and do it justice, what was your first point that you took away?
So the first one, which I just think is brilliant and I'm going to use with clients, with the team, it's hard to read the label when you're inside the jar. I mean, that's
Mm,
just brilliant. It's so
yeah,
powerful, isn't it? And it's that's that piece about really sort of like extracting yourself from the issue, your business, whatever it might be, and someone holding you to account, isn't it? And so you can actually get some perspective, press pause maybe, um, and just sort of see where you are and actually what you're trying to achieve, what you want to get to. Remind yourself what the why is. So, yeah, I love that. Hard to read the label when you're inside the jar.
yeah, that was a brilliant point, wasn't it? And yeah, no person is an island and all that. We need other people to help us with this stuff. So that was a
Absolutely.
key point, wasn't it? So on to me, the second point, the one which really stood out for me was when Dawn was talking around the stats about how many business owners regret selling their business 1 year after
Mm,
they've sold it. And it comes back to what Dawn does with clients, isn't it? She really helps them understand their why, not just
yeah.
preparing their business for sale, but preparing themselves for sale. And it's
Yeah.
what is it? Failure to prepare is preparing to fail. And I think that is really true with this point what Dawn raised, isn't it? Speak to somebody, really understand why you want to get out of it, so you don't end up with regrets in 12 months' time.
Yeah, completely agree. Because for so many people, their purpose is so wrapped up in their business, isn't
Mm.
it? So you need to understand what you actually want to do next. That whole thing. What's next?
Yeah, absolutely. And the third point, Becky?
Well, really flows on from that, about you need to be running towards something, not away from something. And the point that Dawn was making was that often people get to the point of saying, "I've had enough. I need to get out," because they think that that's the better option. They need to jump. When actually, if you're running towards something, you know where you're headed. You know what you're going to be doing afterwards. That's much better position to be in, and just sort of make sure that you're not exiting any situation, but certainly selling your business simply because you're running away. Make sure it is the right thing for you in the longer term. So have that thing that you're running towards, and not just jumping ship.
Yeah. Otherwise, you'll just end up with almost a momentary relief, like
Mm,
thank goodness for that, but it doesn't
yeah,
actually then achieve it. Once that's gone, there's nothing
yeah,
else there, is there? Yeah, that's a really good
no,
point. So many great takeaways from this episode today. Dawn was a great quality guest, and I'm sure the listeners will have taken a lot away as well, Becky. So that brings us to the end of today's show. If you want to get in touch with Dawn, then links to LinkedIn and her website are going to be in the show notes. And we'll also put in links to the 3 books that Dawn recommended as well. And I'll certainly be taking a look at those and having a read of those 3. If you enjoyed today's show, then why not rate and review us? If you give us 5 stars, it really does help other people find this show. And we have to give a massive thank you to our sponsors, Lark & Gowan. Without Lark & Gowan, this show wouldn't be possible. Take a look at how their team of experts can help you and your business. And finally, that just leaves us to say, have a great week, everybody. Take care and boost your health, wealth, and self.